there. I'm looking forward to that. So, Paul, without further ado, we're going to turn it over to you. It's like you're muted, Paul. There we go.
Important to unmute myself. Great. So nice to see everyone. Thanks for the intro. Before I load my slides, I'll just tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. What I heard in the breakout, was a few individuals who maybe don't see themselves as salespeople or are thinking, hey, what are some new ways to come at these opportunities that sit in front of me? I started my career as I was on a sales team, but I was a research analyst. So I thought, okay, this is not a sales job. I'm here to crunch numbers, until I realized that all of my clients were Kraft, Nabisco. They were buying our research to plan their marketing initiatives. Nestle was another one, and they wanted to hear from me. They didn't need to be pitched; they already bought from me. So I was kind of like a post-sale specialist, but keeping that customer happy, keeping them informed and on the leading edge of their innovation, was all part of selling. From there, I founded a digital agency. I did a lot of hands-on marketing practitioner work for a long time. And I actually felt I want a real sales career. I've never been a sales guy and I'm ready. And I went to Google where I did nothing but sales for 6 years, first in the trenches and then getting more into partnerships globally. I worked with big automakers and at one point was leading strategy for the vertical globally. And it was just really exciting work to be behind the scenes arming those salespeople with what they needed to delight their clients. And I've since made, other stops along the way, and now I am a consultant, a founder, and full-time 24/7 salesperson, even though that's not in my title. So that's sort of what we're getting at in the presentation today. So give me a second while I load my slides. And let's get into it. Okay, so how to sell when you're not a salesperson. I'm going to cover this. I mean, this is could be an eternity covering this discussion from all angles, but I'm going to cover it in 5 bite-sized pieces. We're going to talk about how to view yourself, how to represent your product, making it easy to say yes. That is, I assume, the end game for what we're doing here. How to sell with confidence and how to feel authentic so that what you're doing doesn't feel like a masquerade, but actually very real and honest. And finally, how to do it in an organized manner. We're all in business, which means at some point, if we're selling, we want to find a way to sell efficiently and effectively, right? So these are the 5 angles we'll take. But before we get into it, I'm going to ask you to weigh in a little bit. So take out your phones and you can zap that QR code. And I'm going to ask you, it'll take you to a very simple 1-question poll. What turns you off about the idea of selling? And I just want to see real time, what comes to mind? I've done my best to give you an array of different answers here, and it's fun to watch these come in real time. We got a couple dozen people here, so we should get some good data. I'll give you 60 seconds.
We're just picking one of these, Paul.
You can pick multiple. Good question.
Hmm.
All right, 30 more seconds. So there are a couple of front runners here. I certainly relate to all of these. Feeling pushy or aggressive. I mean, I would wager everybody on this call has been on the receiving end of that and probably gets cold sweats thinking about ever, being on the giving end of that. God forbid we ever could be accused of being too pushy or aggressive. Well, there is a fine line here. All right, 10 more seconds. The next one, I don't like being sold to, so I don't want to sell. Interesting. I would argue some people do like being sold to. They just don't always realize it. And when you're sold to and you don't know it, that's actually a really good experience. Because what it means is that person really cared to listen to you and to fit what they're selling to, a solution. What else? I skipped one here. Not wanting to be seen as salesy, definitely. And that sort of overlaps with being pushy or aggressive. It overlaps with a few of these other ones. Feels inauthentic. Okay, that's important, right? We touched on this on the last slide about the importance of authenticity. And yeah, manipulative, the feeling of rejection, not knowing what to say. Hey, I'm glad to see that lack of confidence is relatively low here. Fear of failure, relatively low. Why? Well, if you're founders, this is, these are, your own confidence and your own embrace of failing forward are going to be two big drivers of your success. So these are good. Thanks for informing this conversation, and I think we can move forward. So let's start with the first one: how to see yourself as a salesperson. So for starters, there's this idea that I'm not in sales, right? I'm not in sales. That's the sales guy. That's the sales leader and the team that she's leading. Those are the salespeople. I'm doing something else. And that's not unheard of. But actually, I would argue that you are. Sorry, each and every one of you is. Why? Because sales is not about the title. Sales is about persuasion. It's about problem solving. It's about uh, negotiation and resolution. So if you've ever solved a problem, if you've ever told a story, if you've ever convinced someone to see your point of view, poof, you're in sales. And not only that, but if you've done it and you enjoy doing it, I would argue you could be pretty good at sales. So humor me for a moment. Just consider the idea that I never saw myself as a salesperson. I never thought I'm one of those people in sales. At least for the next half hour, let's just pretend you are. We can always hash this out further in the Q&A. I want to give you another perspective here. Think about what people go and study and see it through the lens of the departments in an organization. So when you look at the number of graduate degrees earned annually in the US, I'm not going to share the numbers here because it's immaterial. Relativity is important, but computer science, got about 60,000 degrees. So, that much I'll tell you. 60,000 degrees annually in the US. Law, you've got, certainly a good number of people coming out of law school every year. Engineering, marketing, operations. Hey, these are departments, right? So you would make the assumption that there's a high level of correlation between people who study computer science and end up in the IT organization or somewhere under the CTO, the CIO. You're probably not going to find someone in the legal office, in the legal department that doesn't have a law degree or working on a law degree, right? And so, what about sales? Nothing. They don't teach sales. There are no graduate degrees in sales. You don't even find them undergrad. You don't even find them in, middle school. Nobody teaches it. There must be a reason, right? Um, so think about it also in terms of personas. So you might say, well, this person in the finance department, they're not in sales. Well, good people in the finance department might go and persuade other people in the organization when they look at the data that only they look at. And they say, hey, look, I see something here that we all need to understand. There is a worrying trend in our financials, or there is a big opportunity that is underutilized, right? If that person does not go and persuade the rest of the C-suite or the rest of the finance organization or collaborators in, cross-functional scenarios, they might never get their ideas off the ground. And so the CFO or the VP of finance or the VP of accounting might have to be a really good salesperson in order to get that across. Think about HR. This is actually probably the easiest one. What happens when you're interviewing for a job and you're selling yourself all day long, 24/7, every interview, you find new ways to say how great you are and how relevant your experience is. And then at some point, they say, we're ready to make you an offer. And this is why our company is so great. You need to work here for the following reasons. Look at all the great perks. Look at the culture, the prestige, whatever it is. HR people, especially recruiters, can be phenomenal salespeople. If you work in ops, right? You see all the moving parts. You have a lot of relationships in the organization, and you say, hey, I think that if we invested in a particular bit of technology or some kind of a tool or some sort of process improvement, I think I can make your lives easier. Well, how am I ever going to get that across if I'm not good at selling that idea? One more example in legal. So there's always this tension, right, between innovation and risk management. Now, clearly, if I'm in the legal department, I'm on the side of risk management. I could care less about innovation until my job of protecting the company is done, right? But if I'm going to be seen as a team player, if I'm going to do my part to keep the company moving forward, it can't only be about crossing out that risk. I have to be able to navigate that tension and maybe meet with that CMO or that chief product officer and say, hey, look, we know what you're trying to do here. You know what I'm trying to do to keep us all safe and out of jail or out of bankruptcy, right? So what's the fine line here? These are all examples of people that aren't quote unquote in sales, but could do a very good job with sales. So hopefully we cross the first checkpoint and you have a new perspective on how to see yourself as a salesperson. Let's move on to how to represent your product. So I'm talking about product in very broad strokes here. We're talking about what it is you're selling. Okay. So that might seem obvious, but I just want to really kind of set that expectation. There is an adage that is well known to some, maybe not everyone. You may have all heard of the term solution selling. Now, I don't know where this came from. It might have come from Craftsman or their competitor Black and Decker or their retailer Home Depot or some management guru in a business school somewhere. But I love this idea that if you are the manufacturer of this tool, you're not selling drills. What you're selling is the holes those drills create. Is somebody in the market for a drill? Or are they trying to put up some wall anchor so that they can hang a big painting or a mirror or some shelves, right? And this analogy, I challenge you to really think about it in your own business because it honestly can go into infinity. You're not selling tires, right? What you're selling is a really warm, fuzzy feeling of safety and protection. Because if those tires perform, you're safe. If those tires don't perform, we all know what can go wrong, right? Another example, if you're in pharma, you sell medicine, you sell, a pharmaceutical product. Is it that long, hard to pronounce name with all of those crazy ingredients and all of that R&D? No, that's complicated. What you're actually selling is relief from that disease or that, you know, state of being that is unpleasant to your end user, your consumer. Look at how relieved that guy is, right? It's because he took your medication. You sold him relief. Last one, cloud services. So I love the idea of also taking this analogy into intangible products, technology products. What are you really selling if you're selling just space on the internet? Well, what you're selling is the convenience of not having to go into the office to retrieve a file or not having to coordinate a dozen different people to give access to some document, but rather just make it all available in one place and everybody gets to it through their own means, right? So remember these analogies, and if you're looking for, some homework after this session, just think about, well, what does it mean to your business? Because solution selling is really about that bottom row. Moving on, part 3. Let's make it easy to say yes. The pivotal concept for this section really is about the art of questioning, and it's truly an art form. I met in the breakout. I met some coaches. I meet coaches and leadership development specialists, trainers all the time. And I have a ton of respect for these people because to learn the art of what you do is, on one level, very, very simple. We all know how to ask a question. But on another level, it takes an incredible amount of introspection and self-discipline and planning. And it takes a really unique ability to get outside yourself, unlearn what you know, to think about how is it that the other person sees the world? They see this problem, this product, what have you. Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. In other words, hunting down that answer, not so hard. Figuring out what's in scope in the first place, that's the important piece. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you a couple of different tactical approaches. Some of you may be familiar with the BANT framework. If you're not, it's an acronym. It stands for budget, authority, need, and timeline. So absent this framework, you might go into a meeting. It might be a sales meeting. It might just be a conversation with a prospective customer, and you don't realize it's a sales meeting. But one way or another, you've got to ask questions. You can't possibly find a fit for what is concerning them. You can't find a solution for their pain until you've asked questions. You might get lucky and they might tell you without being asked, but that's rare. And with just a thoughtful and heartfelt line of questioning and active listening to those answers, you can achieve a lot. But what's nice about this framework is it gets you in the habit of starting to think about how to break these down. So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions about budget, and that's very different from authority. Budget is really the how much questions. The authority is who signs off on it. The need is a different who, because the people using the product might not be the people writing the check. The timeline is a whole other one. That's all about when do you need this and what are the milestones and all that. So if you're interested in this, you can find those questions. You don't have to make them up yourself. Just search for a list of BANT questions. You'll find them. Next, this is real simple, folks. If you've experimented with generative AI, this is a great use case. What you do is you just go to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever your LLM of choice is, and you just say, look, I've got a potential customer here. I know they are unhappy with their current provider. I know that they are skeptical about the technology that my company and other companies offer. But I know this is a decent person. They're reasonable. They have experience investing in these kinds of solutions. What are a couple of questions I can ask to disarm them at the start of the meeting so that they understand that I'm here to help? Press enter, see what comes back. It's amazing. And extending on the AI topic, digital role play is an area that I'm getting a lot more interested in. And full disclosure, the URL that I've listed at the bottom there is a company that I'm co-founding. But you have access to this for free. So this isn't a commercial message here. Imagine being able to simulate a scenario. So before you get in front of that customer and start talking in real time with all the risk of putting your foot in your mouth, why not try it in a safe place? Do it 10 times, do it 20 times, and try to experiment with different questions, see how the answers vary. It's a fascinating experience, and it's something that in the very recent past was completely sci-fi impossible. Moving on, part 4, how to sell with confidence. So here I'm just going to cite some research because I think it can be empowering to understand that when academics go and study something in detail, we can just take that insight and run with it. The takeaway from this study over 30 years ago is that practicing under realistic conditions improves long-term mastery. So just doing it over and over again and saying it out loud in a different modality than just rehearsing the slides by flipping through them can improve your retention and make you more persuasive when you actually are in the spotlight. Different study found that by repeating the content multiple times, not only was there more mastery, but that the confidence was projected and came through very clearly, and that there was a positive linear relationship. So the second and the third and the fourth delivery increased that. Of course, there's diminishing returns, but the point that I'm making here is there's value in taking the time to do it a couple of times over. Just give yourself a few at bats. And then the last piece, we've all heard that it takes how many thousand hours? Is it 10,000 hours of practice at anything to be considered a master? Well, this research found that when you look at top performers versus average performers, one of the key points of differentiation is, frankly, the number of hours of practice. All of these, the through line here is repetition. And that's an important point for my next argument here, which is that there's a simple flow you can follow here. If you know there's an important conversation coming up, a big sales pitch, an important, lunch with a client, something maybe that's not quite as formal as a pitch, but has all the implications of the seriousness for your business. Start early. Don't procrastinate. Don't wait till the last minute. Start a week or two ahead. Build that deck, build that narrative, prepare your flashcards, your talking points, whatever it's going to be. Start early to give yourself time to practice out loud. Think about finishing, not finessing. I've seen a lot of people that do this. They never actually get through the dress rehearsal because they stop themselves on slide 3. They say, I don't like the way this sounds. And then by slide 7, yeah, this is screwed up. I got to stop. No, work through it. If you have to do a C+ version of it the first time around, jot down some notes, fix it, and then go back and take another swing at it. But it's really important to do these things to completion to give yourself the muscle memory and the confidence that you can get through it. As you do this, record and listen. Record yourself. We all hate the sound of our own voice. So if you say, I don't like it, you're not alone. We all hate our own voice. That's a given. But go and listen to that. Listen to that recording, because having it in another modality is going to give you additional texture in your pitch. You're going to hear things in an auditory format that you might not have picked up on if you were reading them on a page or on a screen. And so it's very important to do both the recording and the listening. And finally, repeat. That's why you started early, to give yourself a couple of iterations. And just as a bonus, when you record and listen, I highly recommend you use tools that will also transcribe, because listening to your recording is great. If you also read the transcription, you're going to see some really interesting stuff. For example, I know that I say and as fillers. Some of you have probably heard me say that today. I do that. It is an imperfection. A lot of times I completely miss it until I look at the transcription and I say, good God, why am I saying over and over again? It's because I'm moving fast and I'm not thinking. So some of these tools here are platform specific. Fathom is a platform agnostic note taker. It's plugs into Zoom, Google Meet, what have you. Really good for those transcriptions. Okay, last piece to bring it home. How do we sell in an organized manner? In other words, if you're comfortable selling, you're starting to gain more comfort with this idea, then how do we weave this into all of the other operations that matter in our business? To do this, I'm not trying to be provocative here, but I'm just going to ask you for 3 minutes to try something different. Ignore your product. Forget what it is that is listed on the invoice when you ask for the check. Instead, pay attention to the demand for your product. That is a state of mind. That is a need. It's not your need, it's your customer's need. And it completely separates the need from the object that fills that need. And then think about the journey. What is the route that demand follows? Now, I'm going somewhere with this. In an organization where you sort of track the route of that demand, there's a loop here. Somewhere that demand is created in the customer's state of mind. One day they didn't know about your product, the next day they did. Or one day they didn't know about their problem, but the next day they did. Then that demand gets captured. Once it's captured, usually in the form of a contract signature or just a financial transaction, we'll call it, then it has to get nurtured. You don't want to tell that customer to go to hell just because you now have their money. No, you'd love for them to buy again. You'd love for them to tell their friends, right? And sustaining that demand means bringing them full circle so that they add value to your business. What does this look like? It's when you get a testimonial that you put on your website, and now everybody knows how good you are to that one customer, and they think, wow, maybe I should hire this person because they clearly get results. What else? It might be they agree to come on stage with you at a conference, giving you the credibility you would not otherwise have if you were up there by yourself. There's a million ways that this can happen. But ultimately, what does this look like? You have a marketing department which creates the demand. The sales function, and we'll call business development part of this as well, that's about capturing it. That's really about wrestling that demand to the ground and making it happen. You nurture it in the customer success department. That's where you take care of people, you solve their problems. And to really make it a virtuous cycle, we invest in revenue operations. A lot of that is technology, it's data, it's process innovation, and it's really just breaking down those silos and making sure that everybody's talking. But at the end of the day, what's the through line of all of this? It's all about that demand. And if you really connect with that demand, it doesn't matter what you're selling, you're going to be much more innately connected to your customer and their problem. So I'm just going to leave you with this. This is a little goodie bag. There's a million different books I could recommend for the salesperson who doesn't think they're in sales. This is the best one. Daniel Pink, if you've read him before, it's fantastic. Really just he's written book after book that really is rooted in this generation's transitions from the old way of doing business to the new way. Highly recommend it. There's even a link there. Shortform.com has these great book summaries, and I think they have trial membership where you could go and get this book for free. And then they'll give you like a 20-page PDF instead of reading 300 pages. So I'll leave you with that. And I believe at this point we got a little time for discussion if anybody's got questions.
Thanks, Paul. Yep. There was a question that came in from Taylor. You mentioned tools like Fathom for recording transcripts, so you can kind of coach yourself and see how to improve. Are there other tools you suggest to use?
Well, the ones that I showed when I was an Android user, I used that Google Recorder all the time. Now I use voice notes. I find those to be really good. And what's another one? There's another one called Whisper. It works for Mac. I'm not sure if there's a PC version, but Whisper is really good for transcription as well. If there are more specific use cases about something really detailed, I'm happy to, provide other ideas as well.
How do you coach thinking of founders or first time entrepreneurs? How do you coach them on handling rejection?
Great question. And I think that came up in our interactive demo or interactive poll. Yeah, rejection. I did telemarketing in college. It was one of my first serious jobs. And I learned something really valuable. I mean, that job in the big picture hasn't really factored into my career trajectory a whole lot. Um, but I always think back to that job because success in that job was really about hearing no as much as possible. Now, that might sound counterintuitive, but the reality is if you're selling something that someone out there wants, and we were selling Blackberries before the iPhone, so you can imagine there was some demand. Uh, you want to hear no as much as possible because what it means is you're grinding through your list. And it means that you get to know quickly. If they're not a fit, get off the phone. But you will hear yes. And if you don't, and you only hear no, then you haven't been set up to win. But I was set up to win. There was product market fit. And I realized counterintuitively, the more I hear no, the better, because it means that I will have a chance to learn from every call and I make it a little bit better every time. So, what I would say to answer your question more directly is change your relationship with the word no and just consider that it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to stand tall in the face of rejection and show your customer, great, that doesn't rattle me. That doesn't knock me down. I'll be back. Right. And it's amazing. One of the best feelings for any salesperson is when somebody says no and you come back months or years later and you convince them and they sign and then they tell you, and this has happened to me and I know I'm not alone, hey, it was a mistake. We should have started working with you a long time ago. So I think it's really just a question of outlook and growth mindset.
Uh, Taylor asked a question about, are there people you follow on X or LinkedIn that are kind of, I mean, besides the author that you recommended, others that you kind of luminaries, people you like to follow?
There are a lot. I don't typically go for the name recognition. So a lot of these followers, to be honest, outside of the context of LinkedIn, I couldn't even tell you their name, which is maybe that says something about me or them or LinkedIn. But I like Scott Galloway. I know he's quite popular, so there are probably some Galloway followers on this call. What I like about Scott Galloway is that he's somebody who I don't think ever saw himself as a salesman, but I think he sells his ideas really well, and he's building an empire based entirely on his ideas.
Other questions? Go ahead and come off mute if you've got a question. We've got a little bit of time here.
Yeah, Paul, I've got kind of a two-part question. The first one is just following up on what you were saying on kind of collecting those no's, um, and how each is an opportunity to learn from. Do you have a process as to how you kind of do a postmortem on those no's and maximize the learning that you're getting? And the other question is, there's so much emphasis on when you're selling, it's not about the product that you're selling. It's not about you as the salesperson. It is that focus on what is the solution that either your product or service is going to provide for that potential client. How do you balance that with bringing in your own authenticity and personality, individuality into that sales position without it being something that gets in the way of really providing that clarity around the solution?
So I'll answer them in reverse order. So this question about delivering the solution with authenticity, I'm lucky in as a consultant. Effectively, I am the product, and that makes it very easy, right? Because I I almost it's almost idiot proofed. Like I can't not sell my authentic self because that's in fact what's on the menu, right? Now, it's a little more challenging if I was selling timeshares as a day job while trying to make it as an artist. Okay, there you've got some work to do in terms of showing up as your authentic self in that job, uh, and and still looking yourself in the mirror and saying, this is all part of who I am. To be honest, I'm not a life coach. I'm not a spiritual leader. And so, I can only say that if there is a divergence in your product and who you are, I think that just means you've got to work a little harder to ladder up to your master plan. If you're an artist and you could care less about that timeshare you're selling, no disrespect to anyone who sells timeshares, by the way, um, could be any product. But the point is, if you're okay with the idea that, hey, I do this in order to succeed in that, and it's all part of the master plan, then I think that is authentic. So it's a it's probably the best answer I can muster up, given it's a very philosophical question and a good one. Now, to your point about the process, as I remember the question you were asking, like, what is the process for doing a postmortem and really breaking down that no and understanding what can we take from this to move on? It takes many forms because there are, if you're in quick cycle type of a role, like my telemarketing job selling for BlackBerry, that's a little different than complex enterprise sales where you work on something for 15 months, right? So I'll give you examples of each. When I was doing that telemarketing, if they said no, I would say any particular reason why. And I would know right away, 8 times out of 10, they just didn't want to be on the phone with me, which I totally respect because I would be the same. And so they would say, no, not really. All right, have a great day. Um, but they might say, I might learn something, and I will never know if I don't ask. There were times that I would learn a competitor had beaten us to the punch. We were not exclusive with BlackBerry. There were other resellers out there. Other times, I could tell that this person was just completely paralyzed in their fear of technology. Okay, cool. It's not going to be my job to convince you about technology because I just don't have time for that. But I could hand that lead over to my boss and say, hey, this person might be convinced if you could just come in and maybe build some rapport. So that would be an example of a sale we could win with a quick, effective postmortem. Now, on an enterprise side, I used to sell workforce development agencies. I was bringing them a alternative education solution. They the industry hadn't seen anything like this in 60 years. What we were doing required a ton of education. We had to come in and build relationships. 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 people in this industry were never even going to give us the time of day because they were just punching their clock without any interest for anything new. So the ones that we did get, we would toil away and we would go from meeting to meeting, building coalitions, just stress testing our strategies and asking questions. And if it didn't take off, the first thing we did was we got everybody internal and we tried to anticipate the whys behind that no as much as possible. We would stack rank them. We knew we wouldn't get a lot of time to talk to that client, but you always ask. And in one case, when we asked, we did get an answer, and it was not the answer we expected, which was a huge win because we thought that our product was inflexible. We thought it was because we couldn't match their invoicing and other operational needs. And at the end of the day, we were trying to sell to the Texas Workforce Commission, and our problem was we weren't based in Texas. Nobody told us that during the sales cycle. So by really hashing it out, we figured that out, and that became a big strategic pillar for the future. If we ever want this, we got to set up an office in Texas. We would have never known that if we didn't ask.
Got actually like this question from Taylor, and Pete, thanks for your question. Suggestions on follow up on leads that initially expressed interest, but they didn't close. So maybe shortening that time frame. The ones that are saying, yeah, we should have signed up earlier and didn't. How can we compress that?
This is one of the biggest frustrations that salespeople go through is when somebody says, yeah, I'm interested. And then that's the last you hear from them. Good God, that is just like, you feel like you're a rat in a maze. It's so frustrating. When that happens, know that you might have just gotten lucky and they might have just been in a good mood when they told you they were interested. But the truth is they're flooded with inbox, fatigue, and they are, they got everyone coming at them at the conferences, and, the more authority they have, probably the more they feel that. Sometimes it's just a false positive. But when it's not, there are times when it's not. And I think there is an art to re-engagement. And it's really just about kind of shaking up whatever you've got in your jar and reaching in and pulling something new. So come up with a rotation of re-engagement tactics. Don't just say, hey, it's been a week. Do you have an answer? Hey, it's been 3 weeks, still waiting on that answer. That's going to get you nowhere. What you need to do is look for the incremental ways to add value to the relationship. So if they go dark and they start to ghost you, maybe the first, re-engagement touch point is, hey, I saw something on your website in a press release about a new product you're launching. This sounds like something that you were telling me about was a problem you were struggling with. How's it going so far? I care. I cared enough to ask. I cared enough to read. Another thing might be, hey, I saw you posted on LinkedIn that you attended this conference. Sounds awesome. We were there too. One of the things we saw is that people are struggling with X, Y, and Z. How about you? It could be personal. Of course, you have to apply a light touch there. So don't go saying, hey, I was looking in your dining room window while you were eating dinner last night, and I see that you like steak. Can I take you out for steak? Don't do that. But you can find pseudo-personal information on LinkedIn. For example, you can see, a little bit about what they value. Maybe they're a little vulnerable and they tell us a personal story. They would only do that if they were comfortable sharing that. So my point is, be creative, find different ways to find those signals. There are tools out there, by the way, that do a really good job of this. The best in class is ZoomInfo. ZoomInfo can source all of these amazing signals so that when you want to crack an account, it can tell you, all right, these are the dozen decision makers, and we're going to give you alerts with a little bell at the top of your screen every time something happens. This person's got an open head and they're hiring. That person got nominated for an award, etc. This person changed jobs. That's another big one. So use the tech, use your head and your heart, be diligent, and rotate. Keep it fresh.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for those who asked questions. This was informative, super helpful. We will get the information out as we always do, the recording, and feel free to invite your friends or yourself if you think you should be a speaker here on the Midday Connect. You can connect with Hannah at middayconnect.com, and we'll see you all here next week.
Been great to see everyone. I put my LinkedIn in the chat if you want to connect. Wish you lots of luck with your ventures and everything else. But it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
So long.
Thank you.